Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast, but as always with a nostalgic twist. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul, my co-host once again, for what is going to be quite a funny, and I use the word funny rather than fun, episode. Paul, how are you doing?
Doing well, Nick. Doing well. Yeah, it should be a good one. This we've done all right with anniversaries, haven't we, lately, in terms of how these episodes have fallen and how we picked them. Like you say, someone might think we actually planned these, and it's not sheer fluke. You know, it's not though, is it? We do plan it. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Because I think on the back of the it was first of all the Mágico Gonzalez episode, which was like 35 years after he signed, and then we've obviously recently had the 23 years since Luis Figo back at the Camp Nou, and then this week we're sticking to that level of creativity as far as midfield maestros go, but this time maybe just take a little step back. We're going to talk about the tenure of Gary Neville at Valencia. What a wild time that was. 10 years ago, it was on the 2nd of December, which was yesterday. We are recording on the 3rd, so really, really recent. I didn't see too much noise about this, Paul, to be fair, on social media. You know, we usually see a lot on, we've got algorithms which are pointed squarely at Spanish football and Spanish football nostalgia. I think I only saw 2 tweets about Gary Neville's 10-year anniversary at Valencia, and one of them was ours.
Yeah, it's strange actually how this one isn't being as celebrated. I think it's quite sad, really, given that there's quite a lot to unpack with it and storylines that we could get into. I mean, obviously we've only got time for maybe an hour or so to discuss it, but there's a lot to go over in the 28 games I think that he was at the helm for.
118 days.
118 days. Yeah, you'd think it'd be worthy of more than just 2 tweets, but who are we to judge?
Yeah, you'd like to think so, and there obviously is a bit of pretext to this, which I'm sure we'll address very shortly. And it wasn't just Gary Neville either. I think Gary Neville obviously gets painted with the brush of, frankly, failure when it comes to this. But he obviously brought his brother with him. He brought Fizzer, who is, he's a pretty respected manager out in the US at the minute in his own right. I think he's with Portland Timbers after an ill-fated spell with Inter Miami. But this is Gary's only top job. He's never gone back to it. He's obviously now a Sky Sports analyst, a commentator, a businessman. Some might say a politician on the sidelines or a politician in waiting. Who knows? But 10 years ago, he was the England assistant manager or an assistant coach of the England team. So how this move came around, I'm really not too sure. I know of the obvious link, but I'm not too sure of the credentials. And this all starts with the departure of a manager that we now know well in the UK, a very successful manager, a former Champions League winner under Jose Mourinho as well. Mm-hmm. Nuno Espirito Santo leaving Valencia, Paul. How did that happen? How did that lead to this Neville era?
Yeah, I should say, I think just one thing in there that if my memory serves, I think Phil was involved Valencia just before Gary's arrival, to be fair, but not in.
Oh, is he already there?
In one guise or another, not direct assistant coach role as such. I think it was a bit of a not promotion, but I think it was carted along with it. Anyway, I digress. Nuno Espirito Santo. Yeah. So the season before Neville arrives, Valencia had finished 4th and qualified for the Champions League. There was a few things though. So the new season starts. Obviously, Nuno's at the helm, but things had started to sort of unravel. Really, I think is probably the right word. the style of football wasn't necessarily one that was the most pleasing. I think if everybody goes back to the first episode we did, but we talked about Valencia, and we talked about the fact that Valencian community as a region is one of abundance, really. Fantastic scenery and fantastic agriculture, etc. Fantastic food, cuisine. It's very rich in that sense, So with that, some say that that's what leads to a high expectation of life and how football should be played, and that everything, culture and philosophy, are all tied together. So towards the end of Nuno's tenure, as I say, we get towards November time of 2015. The style of football was not the most palatable in the mind's eye of the Valencia faithful. Also, there was some discontent or some feeling towards the fact that he's very closely linked to, obviously, Jorge Mendes or George Mendes, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And I think that set a little bit, or sat a little bit uncomfortably with some elements of the fan base. Don't forget, this is just over 12 months or so of Meriton or Peter Lim having taken over the club. I think it was middle of 2014 that they took over and brought Nuno in. There was a feeling, like I say, that his ties with Jorge Mendes were a little bit too strong and influencing decisions. Anyway, so the football starts drying up, and there's whistles and there's jeers from the stands at Mestalla. There's also talk that there's a bit of a rift in the dressing room. In particular, I think it was Cadena Ser at the time had a source that said that the relationship between Nuno and Danny Parejo, who was obviously club captain or stalwart within the team, shall we say, was described as cold and deteriorating rapidly from cold. So along with results and performances drying up, the feeling was in Nuno's mind that it was time for him to go. So he's quoted as saying that Mestalla didn't support the team and only criticised the coach, and I felt something wasn't working. So after a pretty dismal performance against Sevilla, in which Valencia lost 1-0, Nuno resigned. So that was I think it was on the 28th of November. And then they had a game scheduled for the 2nd of December, I think it was, against Barcelona, which was overseen by Voro, who seems to be the man waiting in the wings whenever Valencia need a caretaker manager.
You're calling him the Tony Parks of Valencia, is that what we're saying here?
Well, I think he's been called worse things, so yeah, well, let's go with that. So Voro oversees a 1-1 draw against Barcelona, and in the meantime, Peter Lim is very busy behind the scenes, putting in phone calls to his friends, and that's where Gary Neville comes onto the scene. And it's worth mentioning, because I know obviously everybody's thinking right away that it was a decision made purely on business terms, or Peter Lim wanting to get somebody in his way of thinking in to the dressing room. But Peter Lim, we have to stick to what he said, and he did say at the time that he picked Gary not because he's a good friend. Gary's a good coach who happens to be a friend, and I've put him in there for his knowledge. Now, I don't know what he's basing his decision on for Gary Neville being a good coach, because, as you said, he's not really had much of a coaching career to that point.
Well, that's the interesting part of it, where I think we'll maybe start the podcast a bit more light-hearted on Gary Neville, because at the time, so the obvious link here is between Peter Lim and Gary Neville and Salford City. So obviously Peter Lim's taken over Valencia the year before. There's a big air of optimism around Valencia on this, because obviously Peter Lim is a very wealthy man, and he made a lot of promises. There's obviously the talk of new Mestalla as well, that's starting getting rebuilt and all that jazz. And, there's been a lot of false dawns, let's put it that way, in Valencia, in Mestalla recently. Gary Neville himself at the time, like you say, unproven in a top manager job role, but between his role with the England setup, where he was very well high regarded as not just a good coach on the training pitch, but a great sort of like influence on the dressing room, someone who the players at that time could, really look up to in what was quite a turbulent time for England as well. Let's not forget, they'd had, terrible results out in Brazil, for example, going out in the group stages of the World Cup, failing to qualify, getting knocked out of Euro 2016, I think it was, with
that comes later, obviously.
With Iceland the year after, isn't it?
Yeah.
So he's part of this turbulent time, but he is seen as a bit of a positive influence there, isn't he? So I can see why people thought he would be a good fit as a manager.
Yeah, this was for context. He'd retired 4 or so years ago, hadn't he, from playing? And as a player, nobody can dispute that he won pretty well. He won everything that there was to win during his long career. But he'd become very prominently feature in terms of football for his punditry work. He was emerging as one of the what would you describe it as? He was kind of seen as a bit of a, I wouldn't say a breath of fresh air at the time, but even as somebody who's not a Manchester United fan or has a great deal of appreciation for Manchester United, when Gary Neville first started being a pundit, it was interesting to hear his take on things. He was, and I think it's fair to say, for the most part, he still is very articulate, very balanced, fair. He was explaining tactics in a way that people could understand. He was a very good communicator, and there was no sort of hint of bias or preference either way, irrespective of what game that he was commenting on. And I think it warmed a lot of people to him, that you could see that this was somebody who was just clearly passionate about football and had a great deal of knowledge about football, but having that knowledge and applying it in terms of being a coach or becoming a manager or head coach, as it is in Spain, is two very different things, as we'll see. And I think, to go to your point, to give some fairness and that, he was somebody that you thought, actually, what, you kind of do what you want to listen to, what he's got to say and how he explains things. So you could see why there would be the idea that that he could be a good manager. I think if we recall back to his press conference when he's unveiled as the Valencia manager, he does say that he's had a lot of job offers in the last couple of years, but it was the Valencia one that he thought, Valencia is a massive club, what a great opportunity. Now, it could also be that some of that is an embellishment on his part, and it was more of a case of, well, it's a chance to help out a friend and a fellow investor in my football club, and maybe a bit of a free hit. But also, look, if Valencia offered me a job, I'd take it. I've got zero qualifications for it, but I would still. So to put myself in, in his shoes, he was more qualified than I'll ever be for it. And it's a difficult one. I mean, all right, there might be some Levante fans that would dispute that, but I think it would be a very difficult job to turn down if Valencia came knocking.
No, and I really agree with that as well. And you can see that he arrives, in Spain. It is a shock, especially to the Spanish public, as much as it was to hear in the in the UK to go, really, Gary Neville, Valencia, that's an odd one. But he arrives with that, charisma and that confidence that only Gary Neville has got, and he shows it as a pundit as well. My interpretation of this for Gary Neville would be, if he'd have done that at a UK club, for example, a la Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, and such, he probably would have had a lot more success. It probably would have been something that he would have endeared himself to a lot more. But for me, when you turn up at Valencia, as a first-time coach, I can't say he knew too much Spanish. I don't actually know how much Spanish he knew. I'm going to assume it was next to nothing at the time, given the fast nature that has happened. you need to be a bit more prepared as a manager, as a foreign manager, coaching in Spain, don't you? Because there is that language barrier. There is a complete and utter, era of expectation around instant success as well, which boils down to that. So I think it became pretty clear what kind of challenge he had ahead of him after he got out onto that training pitch and after he saw, well, actually, this is what I've got to do. And it was a bit of a mountain to climb, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit you've touched on a very important point there. Obviously, that the language issue. I would say that he's come out and said that it became a problem, and he wishes that he had learned Spanish, etc. I think there's a couple of famous quotes about some of the conversations that he had with Philip at the time, and where they're trying to relay certain things that if you were a footballer in the Premier League, you might be the vernacular would be similar. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
Conceptually, culturally as well. Which and the two of them, they're from Bury, really. They're not Mancunians. I mean, depends if you buy it. Well, if you're buying or selling, then it depends. Bury's got its own postcode, so it's not. It's Greater Manchester, really. Anyway, I think that the fact that he'd never played in Spain, or obviously he never had a career in Spain. He played in one-off fixtures as the in a Champions League draw dictates, etc. But having not lived and breathed La Liga for a bit, there's obviously going to be a cultural clash. And to go to your point about endearing, there are certain aspects that coaches have in Spain that I think, we're lovers of Spanish football, aren't we? There are certain aspects of coaching in Spain that we love, and we think it's absolutely fantastic to see that in Spain. And I think if they tried to do something similar in the Premier League, it'd probably fall on its arse. Likewise, there's a lot of things that coaches do in the Premier League, or how they convey themselves, that wouldn't last 2 seconds in La Liga, because there's just a different mindset or a different language and such. So it is a to climb, and with all of that as a bit of background and context, let's just go back to what we said about what Nuno was leaving behind. It is a divided dressing room. It needs somebody to come in who's going to command respect from the players, but also going to be able to unite the dressing room in a way where there's an idea or a tactic or a format that they can all get behind and believe in. And we definitely touched on this when we were discussing the Rafa Benitez episode, that you need to be able to endear yourself to the fans at Mestalla pretty quickly if you're going to last any real length of time. So what a challenge that is. And I think if we were to sort of lay those bullet points out as KPIs, to use a business thing, Jingo, his key performance indicators are: can you unite the dressing room? Can you get a system of play that the players can get behind, and a system of play that the fans appreciate, to get the fans on side? As we'll see, spoiler alert, it's pretty much the case that he fails on all three accounts,
Yeah.
It's not a great look, is it?
Well, it's like you say, there's a big hill to climb there, and he's not the only manager, from British shores trying to do it at this time as well. In a similar area, you got David Moyes up at Real Sociedad, Chris Coleman just before him as well. Obviously, both of them struggling there. Talking about language barriers, Paul, I don't know if you remember Tony Adams at Granada as well, with trying to explain the offside rule to football players in, I think, Spanish. Wasn't quite sure if it is Spanish or not, but there was a lot of gesticulating and a lot of pointing. But
those three names you've just listed there are podcast episodes of their own, aren't they, as well? Which we can add them to the list for future reference, can't we?
we'll go and plan when their 10-year anniversaries are as well for this one. And like you say, it is the thing about, he probably had a couple more steps to make up because he had to prove himself as a manager as well, and you look who followed him, for example. I don't know if it was straight afterwards, but you've got Marcelinho, who we spoke about recently on the Racing Santander episode. We can see what he's doing with Villarreal right now. Yeah. Again, those are the kind of managers that do unite dressing rooms, that do inspire fan bases. I just think, unfortunately for Gary Neville at the time, he's walked into a bit of a cauldron, and it's really not worked out for him. It didn't start great for him, so we'll start to move into the games. His first game is a Champions League match, so Valencia are in the Champions League. As we said, they finished fourth and had qualified through the summer to be in the group stages. 9th of December, he hosts Lyon at Mestalla. And basically, they need a result to actually progress into the knockout stages. They need to beat Lyon, who at the time were kind of like ailing away ever so slightly. This isn't a Lyon at their pomp. This is a Lyon that has sold a plethora of superstars in the years previous and are sort of like treading water, even in France as well, sort of only competing along, as a second fiddle to PSG, sometimes even further behind some of the other clubs at this time. And for me, this is one of those tone setters for Gary Neville from the bat. And it's unfair because it's the first game. It's a Champions League night at Mestalla. It's never going to be easy. But the fact that they fall out 2-0 here, crash out the competition and go into the Europa League, it sets the bar of expectation for Neville really low, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I mean, in his defence, obviously, the damage is pretty much done with the Champions League by the time he arrives. But a home game like this, your first match against... I want to be careful here because I don't want to sort of sound arrogant or dismissive or whatever towards the French league, but Valencia of this time and La Liga being the quality that it is/was back then, and the squad that Valencia had at their disposal, you would expect them to get a result against Lyon at home. In the circumstances, to really sort of kickstart his tenure, I guess. And it does fall flat, it's a pretty dismal showing. Obviously, it ends up 2-0. And then the first La Liga game is in quick succession. It's only like 4 days later, I think on the 13th of December. A 1-1 draw against Eibar. Again, it was plucky Eibar back then, I guess, wasn't it? It was everybody had a soft spot for them, but it's a team that you'd expect Valencia to beat.
The have and have nots in it when it comes to seeing those two games. You look at, like I say, Lyon at a low ebb. A lot of their superstars have been moved on, and like I say, Eibar, did well in the in La Liga, but like I say, when Valencia are coming to town, you're expecting maybe a bit more of a game, and I suppose it's a tough place to go, but it's just one of those.
Is it worth us just before you do? Is it worth us just mentioning some of the names that were in that Valencia squad at the time, just to refresh a few?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you've got it to hand, brilliant.
Yeah, well, they had Matty Ryan in goal, who a lot of people will remember at the time was somebody that you could get relatively cheap on Football Manager or FIFA, which is always, I think, from our podcast point of view, and certainly whenever we've had Matt on and we've talked about our 11s, we find that the Football Manager and that is a good measure of posterity, I guess, for how well people can recall certain players.
Yes. Very, very much the end of a very good line of Australian goalkeepers as well, I find.
Yeah.
He's obviously still playing now for Levante. If he's listening, I'm sure he would be. I'm sure he's still
get in touch and we'll talk to you about your time at Valencia.
In Valencia. Yeah. Well, he's a turncoat now because he's at Levante, isn't he? But like I say, he'll be licking his wounds at being on the end of that Nico Williams goal this weekend. That's an absolute corker. But let's wind the clock back 10 years. a few more. You've mentioned Parejo as well at the heart of the midfield. Like I said, there was a pretty decent spine, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, and they had Alvaro Negredo, they had Paco Alcacer. Who else we got? We got João Cancelo. I don't know if this is a strength or a weakness, depends on your outlook, but Squadron Mustafi, who at times looked brilliant, other times not so brilliant. I don't think Arsenal fans remember him as being one of the great centre halves that have turned out for their team, but he did all right in Valencia.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
You know, I think they also had at the time, I think this is the season where they had a very young Rodrigo de Paul, who obviously would return to La Liga with Atleti in recent years. So it was, it was a team of strength. I know there's plenty of other players that we could name. I mean, there's a squad list of 25, isn't there? So there's plenty of players we could mention there, but they're just some of the ones that stick out. So yeah, I just think it's worth, when we're talking about, we'd expect them to be Eibar or Leon and various others. You can see where we're coming from.
Yeah, you've got a team of stars really, of solidity, and it's not the Valencia that we've seen, in the previous decade, that were winning La Liga titles, and even the latter one with the likes of David Villa. Happy birthday, David Villa, by the way, just as a quick mention, and David Silva and co.
Yet another date.
We just make it work. And so you would expect more given the tools he's got at his disposal. He does get his first win. Notably, it's in the Copa del Rey second leg game. So this is when they did a away tie first and a home tie for a second leg across both games. He played Baracaldo, which again at the time, small Basque club in Bilbao or in the suburbs of Bilbao. So, they're expecting a pretty decent win. They were already 3-1 up, to be fair, after the game at the La Salle. So, they win 2-0. It's Neville's first win as a manager. And for a moment, you feel like, well, actually, maybe this has been quite a good idea. Maybe this is the opportunity. Maybe he doesn't have enough, time with the squad for his first match against Leon. He's got a decent result here. Can we kick on? It's just before Christmas as well. And that kind of like built in a bit of hope, didn't it? After Christmas, that hope seemed to dwindle quite quickly, didn't it, Paul? After that, there were no more wins in the league, I should say, because they did do quite well in the Europa League when they dropped into that competition. And I think that's kind of like the chalk and cheese for Gary Neville, isn't it? He'll always be remembered for his league form. But he actually did quite okay in Europe in the end, in the grand scheme of things.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Now, part of the reason for the breakdown and the strain on the relationship with Nuno, don't forget, I think I neglected to mention this, but Valencia's ethos at this time from Peter Lim was that it's a business, so we need to focus on planning on being in the Champions League next year, or getting as far as we can in the competition, and very quickly they drop out of the Champions League and fall into the Europa League. And whilst it's good to progress in the Europa League, it's not quite as lucrative as qualifying for Europe again the following season. So from a Valencia point of view, it's kind of like, and I would say that now, given the situation that Valencia have been in over the last handful of years, they would snatch your hand off for a good Europa League run, wouldn't they, just to even get to it?
Absolutely.
But at the time, the mentality was very different. So that does have an impact on how contemporary opinion was formed over Gary Neville's tenure there. Old format of the Europa League as well. So it was the Thursday night, Sunday, which, I mean, it still is, but it was kind of some of even the big clubs in the competition at that time were not quite as keen on putting out their full strength sides as well.
Yeah,
doesn't take anything away from him.
No, exactly. And you can sort of see, like, there are those flickers in Europe of hope. And again, I don't want to dismay Rapid Vienna, obviously of the Austrian league, but Valencia absolutely knocked them literally for 6. A massive night in Mestalla in February in the Europa League. 6-0 they beat the Austrian sides there. Mestalla was roaring, and it kind of felt like there could be something there. They've seen something finally, because it was at this time that they were looking to persevere with Neville. They're like, it wasn't going to be, oh no, we're going to sack him again, which is kind of the culture a little bit sometimes in Spain as well, if it's really not going wrong. And the league form was way off at this point. But in comparison to that, into the domestic standpoint, I suppose one of the games that everyone will remember from a Gary Neville's perspective is that picture of him in the dugout, sort of like just staring into space, like he's just had everything robbed from him. And that is when Barcelona beat them 7-0 in the Copa del Rey semi-final. And this is the height of MSN. You've got Messi, Suarez, and Neymar. You're coming up against an absolute beast, but 7-0 is still an embarrassing scoreline to be conceding if you are, such a proud and traditional and giant club like Valencia, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Look, the MSN was one of the most, if not the most potent attacking trident of the last, 25 years in La Liga. I know some other people might feel differently about, David Villa, Messi, and Pedro, or maybe even if you're that way inclined, you might feel that way about what was the BBC, Bale, Benzema, and Ronaldo.
Cristiano. Yeah.
I'm not getting into that debate here, but it's undisputed that the Messi, Suarez, and Neymar trident was
more of an Eto'o, Henry, Ronaldinho man myself, but
Well, we would be on this podcast, wouldn't we? But it's certainly one of the one of the ones that you would fear going up against. But to lose 7-0, and it wasn't just that, like, it was a 7-0 scoreline, which was labelled by Marker as a historic humiliation. It was the manner of it as well. Like, I mean, tactically, at this point, it's pretty clear that Neville's way out of his depth. He doesn't command the attention or even the respect in some regards from the players. And I think, just to sort of sum it up, because really this is the, do you call it a death toll in his managerial career? It's not like the warning signs for this sort of thing weren't there before. In his first 8 games as manager of Valencia, he used 5 different formations and kind of carried on from there, causing tactical confusion throughout the rest of his 20 other matches that he oversaw amongst the players. I mean, even his first win against, was it Espanyol? Was it 2-1 a win? Incredibly lucky. It was an own goal that helps him along the way, and there wasn't really, by this point, 27, 28 matches down the line or so from when he's first appointed. There doesn't look to be any, progress or clarity in how the team's playing, irrespective of results. If anything, it looks like it's gone completely the other way. The KPIs have all well and truly been missed at this point.
Out of the window.
Absolutely, yeah.
It you know what it's got for me, sort of like Brian Clough at Leeds type of vibes. Somebody who really sort of like believes in what they want to do, and will then just keep trying to change it or tinker it or slightly until it works, not really fully understanding, the heart of the problem. And again, it is a humiliation losing 7-0, but there's no humiliation in losing to a Luis Enrique side that's got, the world's best player in it, alongside 2 of the other world's best players in it as well. Yeah. Behind, a plethora of other really high class, top quality footballers as well. So
exactly. I mean, put it this way: at the time, I remember when Barcelona came to the Etihad, and they didn't start the three of them, they only started with Suarez and Messi, which is enough of a handful. And then when they took Suarez off and brought Neymar on, the entire home end started shouting cheats. Not because of anything other than it felt like they did have a cheat code to be able to bring on a player of that quality at the time. Obviously, it's a bit of a different story with Neymar these days, but what you're
it's like bringing on some ringers, isn't it? In Sunday League, it's like, oh, really? He's not in your squad, but it is
unnecessary punishment on your opposition, isn't it? Really. At this point, you're right. As good as the opposition are, the fact is that Valencia had gone from being a fractured dressing room, coasting by but falling short of expectations, to being a mess, really. That's only 6 points above the relegation zone, and had no sort of. There was nothing inspiring in the performances, or nothing that made you think these players are actually taking on board what he's saying, or he's able to articulate his points or his style of play in a way that these players are able to understand, let alone able to play to.
Absolutely, and I think that is where we see the heart of the problem in the league, in La Liga, and the slide down the table continues. Like you say, they've got aspirations of being back in the Champions League the season after and finishing in that top four space, which was still, those two extra positions behind Real Madrid and Barcelona. Atleti were obviously the emerging force and had just won a La Liga title, so they were up there. But there was always that other spot, which was never guaranteed for like a Villarreal or a Sevilla or something like that. It was always sort of like traded around those kind of clubs. So the opportunity was there. When you look at the statistics, Neville managed 16 games in La Liga. He drew 5, lost 8, but only won 3. And when you're going from the beginning of December to the end of March, that is the, not to be cliche, that's the core of the season, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Well, that's the bit where you need to be in your stride and picking up points quite regularly in order to be competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's quite telling about it is that within the newspapers, both within Spain and abroad, it was basically, I think it was Marca and Ass. One of them went with long overdue, or words to that effect, and the other one basically said it was inevitable. There was no surprise really that he was dismissed, only that he'd lasted that long, I think is fair to say. And it's kind of like, it sounds a bit like we're getting digs in at him here, and that's not what we're about. It's just a case of it felt wrong to appoint him. It didn't look right in the first few games. And by the end of it, it was just like everybody's expectations had kind of just been proven correct. I mean, what's that? Remember that Blackadder scene with the? What did you think of that? And he says, "Oh well, it started badly. It tailed off towards the end, and less said about the middle, the better." It was kind of like that, really, wasn't it?
Certainly feels like that, and sort of even in his last month, where it's like you say, after the Barcelona defeat, it's kind of like, when do you put it out of its misery, or when do you put him out of his misery, I should say, because he was clearly like, you could see the dejection in his face and that he ran out of ideas. He did get a win away in Granada, 2-1 at the Estadio Las Carmenes. An important league victory, really, because it helped them sort of like keep just above that relegation zone. And for a moment you thought, well, actually maybe he could, and then comes March, which is sort of like the long stay of death from here. Diego Simeone turns up. I shared this photo today, and what was he, 118 days versus, I think he's on something like 5,300 and odd or something like that, and counting. So you've got possibly one of the shortest managerial stints in La Liga history against one of the longest managerial stints in La Liga history now. An absolute drubbing at Mestalla, 3-1 it was to Atleti. They just outclassed by everything. That if I was a Valencia fan watching that Atleti side by Simeone, that is everything I would want to see from my team. They must look at that and look at Atleti in the circumstances and go, that should be us. We should be like that. We should have someone who is, cleverly investing in the squad, recruiting well, bringing in a manager who they can buy into and can be well disciplined and well drilled. I think it's that jealousy, which is probably the way I'm going to put it, that actually turns the Mestalla completely toxic against Neville. And he becomes sort of like the point of frustration, not just for the managerial on the pitch issues, for the wider issues that were starting to emerge in Valencia, the cracks, the false promises that were being made.
Oh, well, let's put it this way. I said at the start that at this point, it's still relatively new in terms of the tenure of, or the stewardship. We'll call it stewardship, although it feels somewhat of an oxymoron in this set of circumstances. Of
hostage situation.
Yes, that's a good. That's a better analogy, isn't it? Really, with regards to where the club was at or has evolved over time, and a lot of the problems that Valencia entered into during this period are still prevalent today, or still leaving or taking effect on the way the club exists. If anything, things have deteriorated further. We've seen some relatively bizarre things occur with regards to on and off the field management. And this, like you say, this is kind of, it feels like such a long time ago. I mean, it's a decade ago, isn't it? That he comes in, and it's almost weird to think that, things have not, poor Valencia fans, things haven't really improved for you.
Nothing's changed at all.
No. And bearing in mind, it's it's kind of like the world's slowest decline, and how in fact the club has, in the 10 years since Neville's departure, they've managed to survive relegation, but have, some would say, had the squad asset stripped for several years. They've also reached a Copa del Rey final with Jose Bordalas as the manager. They've gone through quite a lot, and yet it's really quite difficult to say that they've had much to shout about in a positive sense. Now, I think it's probably fair as well. Go on.
I was going to say, it's a bit like the Spanish Newcastle, isn't it, under Mike Ashley? We're going to keep drawing metaphors. It's a bit like Mike Ashley's Newcastle, isn't it, where you just got an owner who doesn't seem that bothered about
how unpopular they become as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, he just couldn't give a shit. And, the club will continue to tread water. It does feel like a matter of when, not if, they will get relegated. And I know, Carlos Corberán at the minute is trying to, keep the club in the division, but there's only so much you can do when you've got, one hand behind your back, so to speak. So it'd be interesting to see how that does end up one day.
I think we should definitely say at this point, because I know that we've made a few, or we've expressed a few opinions here about the way that Valencia as a club have been run, and obviously what they've gone through. And in the interest of avoiding litigation, I just want to invite anybody from Meriton who has an alternative opinion to let us know, what we've misunderstood or misinterpreted as outsiders looking in, when we're saying that, we feel like it's been a rough ride for fans of the club and performances. Because I really think it would be interesting to know what the plan is for the club.
Well, when you look at the plans now, well, that's it. When you look at the plans now, in terms of, they're putting capital back in to bring the new Mestalla back online, which is an interesting prospect, trying to rebuild a building which was half built 15, 20 years ago.
I'm not sure if that's just another. Well, it kind of. There's been some people that have suggested anyway that the to get that, what do you call it, shell of a building into any kind of state where you could continue work on it, because it's basically that in itself is not just appreciated but deteriorated in the intervening years. Some people have suggested that it might not actually be viable for them to use the structure that's in place as it currently stands. Now, I know obviously there's been some movement in the last few months with newspaper articles and that, but part of me, and this is maybe me feeling cynical, and again, if there's anybody who supports Valencia or works for the club who has a different opinion, and I'd love to hear it, but it kind of feels a little bit like the talk of the new Mestalla movie is more just distraction tactics or delay. You know,
I'll give you as an ultimate authority as a Blackpool fan. The one we always get, the character we always get as a Blackpool fan, is the new training ground.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, say, Blackpool's still using Squires Gate, which was used by Stanley Matthews back in the 1950s, and you know, it's one of those where it was always just like, oh well, yeah, we've got plans for a new training ground coming out next week. It was always just a distraction from something better, something worse. So I completely understand why, you know, you would think that would definitely be a possible thing for that.
Well, it's what's in Wizards of Oz, isn't it? It's jam tomorrow, you know, and it never comes. And I just maybe I'm I don't know. I can only say it as an outsider looking, and it feels very much like what we've just referenced there.
And in the week that they've just released Wiki for Good as well. We are on fire with like these, you know, on trend, like say that the Wizard of Oz will get picked up now by the algorithms and will be top of the tree for everything now, which should be great.
Hey, listen, you know, we're nothing but people with our fingers on the pulse, eh?
Oh, absolutely. That's what they say about me, Paul. A man with his finger on the pulse, or a weak pulse. I'm not too sure which one. Speaking of weak pulses, the last game that Gary Neville managed was a 2-0 home defeat against Celta Vigo. His final act, it was a game that, you know, and a performance that completely lacked any kind of spark, any kind of shape, any kind of belief. You could see that he'd lost the squad, he'd lost the fans, it was time to go. And then a matter of days later, he was relieved of his duties as Valencia manager. I've got it written down here: 4 months, 28 games, 10 wins, 7 draws, 11 defeats across all competitions. When you read it like that, actually isn't that bad. But like you say, it was the league that ultimately sealed his fate. He leaves, and you know, maybe left with dignity. He certainly has more experience as a manager than he had before he arrived. But I think the long-term effect on Gary Neville, and he's spoken about this, you know, quite openly, it just isn't for him. And you know, I think he has a genuine respect for people who do go into management nowadays for that. But I think he finds his world is his businesses, his media career and things like that, which he is very, very good at as well. And I know he's a great voice for Manchester and for the region as well. But you know, he's found his groove there. I don't think he'll ever come to management or even coaching ever again. Do you?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think, and it's important to say that it does seem to have. It's been a learning experience for him, because you see the way that he speaks about coaches and managers in the years since. There is a newfound level of respect there from him, and he's definitely much better as a businessman, or more successful as a businessman than than he was as a manager. He's somebody who I think does actually represent Manchester very well in terms of commerce and trade. I know we're not a political podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but we have to hold hands, recognise when somebody's doing a fair job. And I think you're right. I think there's every chance that at some point in the future, maybe he does have a dabble in politics. You never know if Andy Burnham moves on from being the mayor of Greater Manchester. Gary Neville might put his name forward. Who knows what the future holds? It wouldn't surprise me. I think I'd be more surprised if he turned up at another football club to say he was taking over as a manager
in Spain.
Yeah. I think it's probably good to put this into a bit more context as well. I know obviously you mentioned David Moyes at Real Sociedad and Chris Coleman as well, didn't you? Earlier on. This is Neville's experience in La Liga or in Spanish football is one which we because of the timing of it and because Moyes was really unsuccessful during the same period, and we will do a David Moyes episode, won't we? Because I think there's lots of like little things in there that are a lot more light-hearted than perhaps this one has been.
If Gary Neville had been remembered for anything, at least he didn't A, try and speak Spanish, and B, speak English in a Spanish accent like David Moyes did, because,
and when he got sent off or sent to the stands, he didn't go and share a bag of crisps with a young child. Like that. I don't mean that in a dodgy way. I just mean it was something. It was just a memorable kind of, how seriously is he taking this type of thing?
But it does really beg a question, doesn't it? And maybe the wider thing. And I know we're nostalgic, but looking towards the future, we're looking at a Premier League which is being dominated by Spanish managers at the moment. So they've got and they all seem to come from this one little part of the Basque Country as well, which is even more unique. The same can't be said for sort of like our exports in management. And don't get me wrong, I think Lee Bowyer is manager of Montserrat or something like that at the minute. But there's no one at a top club in Europe that is screaming out for British managers, are they really? Whereas here at least some of those managers did have a try. It's quite a unique thing now, isn't it? Like, so I think even in the Premier League, we haven't really got too many successful British managers to point a stick at the minute.
No, and I know some people might be shouting, saying, what's his face? It was at Brighton and then Chelsea and then West Ham.
Graham Potter.
Yeah. He's gone back to Scandinavia.
Sweden.
Coach.
Sweden? It's a Sweden national manager now.
Yeah, and no disrespect to Sweden or any of Scandinavia, but it's not one of the top leagues in Europe, is it? Or one of the top jobs in Europe? And there isn't a manager who I can think of that is of it's from the British Isles and that has gone on to manage a top job in a foreign league really since. And
I think the only one I think the only one you can point a modicum of dignity at is John Toshak, who's obviously famed for his time, managing in Spain. But you've got to remember that is over 30 years ago now.
Yeah,
so,
a long time ago, yeah.
It's a long time.
We could go back in time, but I mean, in the last decade or so, there's been none of it really, and some people might say that that's because there's two things at play there. One, a snobbery from abroad towards the typical tactics or style of play that English managers are generalised as, or British managers are generalised at employing, 4-4-2 long ball or anything like that. I mean, it's in Germany they have some I won't say derogatory, but they have some sort of they have several terms that they chuck about as being like dismissive of British football, and I know there's some in Spain as well where it's kind of dismissed as being like, simplistic. And largely that is quite true. We can think of it, but I also think that that's quite unfair criticism towards some managers. But the second
Steve
thing
McLaren's out of a job now. He could do a job in Spain, surely.
Yeah, is he not the Jamaica coach anymore?
Oh, he resigned over their failure to make the World Cup at the first time of asking. Right. He's no longer there. But that would have been an interesting one. Or David Movilla at Marbella. He's only been in charge for 2 games, but he's not had 2 great results. But I'm seeing Big Sam down in Marbella playing in the Primera Federación.
Yeah,
match made in heaven.
I think he'd relish the opportunity at that. But the other factor as to why some people think that the British managers don't tend to move into Europe's top leagues typically is because they think that the disparity in money between the English Premier League, the Championship, and 1 or 2 jobs in maybe League One and 1 or 2 jobs in Scotland. That the money there is ones that abroad managers aren't really paid to the same level. I know that there are obviously some very, very well paid managers across Europe, but I think it's more the lure of Championship and Premier League is where a lot of British managers tend to want to go because it seems to be a bit of a conveyor belt, doesn't it? I mean, we're not an English football podcast, but it does seem to be a bit of a conveyor belt, and they all are a revolving door situation at some of the clubs in the EFL. Anyway, digressed quite a lot there. We should probably wrap.
So what we're actually saying is we admire Gary Neville for taking on a challenge and going somewhere that the likes of the Sir Alex Ferguson and I'm struggling to name English managers now. Sam Allardyce, Steve Bruce didn't want to go and do. He went straight for the jugular, went to Valencia. And to be fair, I think his time, jokingly, sort of like 10 years on, will always be remembered as a bit of a failure. But I think it's a small cog of failure in a wider machine of failure at the time as well, and became a real collision of basically what we're seeing happening before our eyes in the current time. And I'm not saying it's his fault, but he was one of the dominoes that started to fall. One of the ideas which didn't really work out, that have just been a lineage of catastrophes for Valencia in the last few years, with bright sparks, in between there and then. But yes, hopefully he gives it a crack again. Fizz has obviously gone for it, with his time in America. Good old Fizz. It would have been interesting to see whether he actually spoke in Spanish at Inter Miami, because I do believe, again, stick with me, the English-speaking David Beckham implemented a culture of wanting to recruit South Americans, so they did everything in Spanish because it's Miami. I think that's the tale. So I'd be interested to see whether potentially. And again, I don't know if there's a lineup here. I don't think there is, because I think the Fizzer era just ended before Messi arrived with what was it, Martino, wasn't it? Who came alongside Messi into Miami. But the idea that Fizzer could have been managing Lionel Messi is an absolutely delicious concept that I would love to have seen. Just imagining Lionel Messi going, "What's this guy from Bury saying to me about playing football?" So
didn't I beat you 7-0 when you were an assistant with your brother?
Yeah, I recognise you. You were the one in tears on the bench. Yeah, very, very odd. But yes, I admire Gary Neville for his candour of going to Valencia. He's obviously proved not to be the right thing.
It's given us a great chapter in Spanish football. Whether you want to laugh or cry, it has given us a memorable bit of that season and that campaign, which all adds to the wonderful tapestry of Spanish football. And listen, if you add my wins in Spanish football to your wins in Spanish football, Gary Neville still has more than us combined currently.
Currently, never say never, but no, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for going over this wonderful anniversary of Gary Neville's time as Valencia manager with me. We've still got plenty to look forward to in the run-up to Christmas as well. We've got some more guest appearances, and we're going to be looking at some Copa del Rey football in the next couple of weeks as well. Also, keep an eye out for the next issue of Revista El Partido coming your way very, very soon. It's going to be full of all sorts of cool stories in there, and even some La Liga Christmas present advice if you are scrambling to find your lovely other half something that she desperately needs before Christmas. How about a Malaga poncho? Which is one of the many things I managed to find scrolling through the internet, Paul. So keep your eye out for that as well. And obviously, go back and listen to any of the other episodes that we've done. We've had some fantastic ones with Guillaume Balaguer recently. We've had Christopher Evans, who is doing a book talk in Newport on Friday, if you are around to hear him talk about Los Leones, which is an incredible book. We've had Brendan Madden, Football is La Leche, with his Once Upon a Time in the Liga. It's a back catalogue of class, isn't it, Paul?
It is, and the things we've got on the horizon as well should have people very, very excited. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed. I say gracias to you guys at home. Thanks for listening once again. Go like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Go follow us on YouTube if you can too, and follow us on social media as well. Get involved. You know, we love putting some tweets out there with some really fantastic pictures and things like that and videos. So it's always nice to hear from you guys too. But until next time, we'll see you then. Hasta luego.